This is a study on the gathering time versus the scattering time. We're comparing Ellen White's statements. I first had done this study back in 2012 and 2013, but I found that there is someone who's presenting on videos what the gathering and scattering times are. They're laying it out line upon line, but they're laying it out to the opposite of what Ellen White says. So I think it's important that we focus on truth. So we're coming to early writings, page 74, paragraph 1. September 23, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. See page 86. And that efforts must be redoubled in this gathering time. In the scattering, Israel was smitten and torn, but now in the scattering time, God will heal and bind up his people. In the scattering, efforts made to spread the truth had but little effect, accomplished but little or nothing. But in the gathering, when God had set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effect. All should be united and zealous in the work. I saw that it was wrong for any to refer to the scattering for examples to govern us now in the gathering. For if God should do no more for us now than he did then, Israel would never be gathered. So this person who was putting this gathering and scattering line upon line, they were doing it the opposite of what Ellen White describes. And she says in the bottom part here, I saw that it was wrong for any to refer to the scattering for examples to govern us now in the gathering. And why is that? Because if we did, Israel would never be gathered. So it's important to look at this and understand what's being said. This is said in several places in Ellen White's writings. So let's go to page 86. There's a reference here to the first sentence of this paragraph, and it's from the supplement and explanation. And of course, we want to view these things with caution because it's had some influence that's been outside of Ellen White's statements, but it's still important to consider. Number 3, the view that the Lord had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people on page 74 refers only to the union and strength once existing among those looking for Christ, and to the fact that he had begun to unite and to raise up his people again. So, if we're looking for the gathering, we are going to look to a time when there was union and strength that existed among those who were looking for Christ. This is during the Millerite time when you look at it with history. And you're going to look at when was there a time when he had begun to unite and raise up his people again. So we're going to look for those things. So then here is the same paragraph, but it's the ending of the paragraph. And she says, I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures so that none could see it until his hand was removed. So I'm going to pause a little, let you read this. So it's calling attention to the 1843 chart, and we should take that seriously. And then in Experience and Views, page 61, paragraph 1, we have the same statement. So I'm going to ask you to look at this and notice where it says the gathering and the scattering time, what happened. The scattering times were when Israel was smitten and torn, Efforts were made to spread the truth, but had little effect and accomplished but little or nothing. The gathering time, God will heal and bind up his people. And when God had set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effect. And during the gathering time, it's important that all should be united and zealous in the work. So, once again, we can see that it's important to understand correctly when is the scattering and when is the gathering. And then in experience and views, page 61, paragraph 1, again it says, I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. So which chart is she endorsing? This was written in 1851 and later included with minor rewording in early writings, which was written in 1882. Therefore, when this was written, the only two charts she could have been endorsing were the 1843 and the 1850 charts. She was silent about the 1863 chart. So then here's another statement. And this is documented as being October 23. So we have September 23, October 23, and later on November 1 of 1850. So some of this is referencing, when the vision occurred, but others when it was printed or published. So she's talking again about the vision that the Lord gave her. She says, I saw that we must redouble our efforts now in this gathering time. I saw that it was a shame for us to refer to the scattering time for examples to govern us now in the gathering time. For if God does no more for us now than he did then, we shall never be gathered. In the scattering, Israel were torn and smitten, but now God will heal and bind them up. And then she says, I saw that God had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. They are those who have been covered up beneath the rubbish since 1844. I saw that efforts to spread the truth should now be made, such as were put forth in 1843 and 1844. In the scattering, efforts made to spread the truth had but little effect, accomplished little or nothing. But now in the gathering time, when God has set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effects, and all should be zealous and united in the work. So this is in MS 15. So you can see this is in several places. But the sentences that are included in this talk about the covering up of Miller's rules, or Miller's dream and the jewels in Miller's dream, if you want to go back and read that. And they were covered up beneath the rubbish since 1844. And then it refers to efforts that were made to spread the truth in 1843 and 44. So this would be the first time of the gathering and the scattering. And so we want to take a look at that. And then I'm skipping a few paragraphs. In paragraph 4 of MS 15, it says, I saw that the angel's messages were made plain would have effect. I saw that the old chart was directed by the Lord, and that not a peg of it should be altered without inspiration. I saw that the figures on the chart were as God wanted them, and that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. Now, what was hidden really was they thought that the date that Christ would return was in April of 1844. Prophetically, that was considered when 1843 ended. And then they later saw that it would be October 22, 1844. So after this, there's 3 paragraphs. that are, and another paragraph, and then a second paragraph. Altogether, there's 7 paragraphs that are talking about the close of probation and the most holy place and the last plagues and all of that. These are also found in this same writing that is in Spalding and McGann and Review and Herald, and you could see that as you look through it and study it. And then in paragraph 12 of MS 15 from 1850, then I saw the daily that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the first angel's message. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily, but since, in the confusion, other views have been embraced and darkness has followed, I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time never again will be a test. So there's 2 things she's referencing here. One is the daily, when everyone understood it before October 22, 1844, and then that time was no longer a test. So there was confusion after October 22, 1844, which was a disappointment. So if this was being applied now, we would want to look at what is it that was a disappointment and a time when people were united versus then when they were scattered and confused. And that's really what it's talking about here. So then verse 13, the first part you can read yourself, but there was a sister who was having visions, and she, based on those visions, was telling people that they needed to go to Jerusalem and do some work there. Early writings, page 74, mentions this, but it doesn't mention this sister's name. But it talks about why not to go to Jerusalem in early writings, so you can compare the two. So I'm going to go down to the middle of this paragraph. I saw that the faults and errors of Sister Minor and those with her in past time had not been confessed. This is the reason why they have been left to run into great errors. So this sister who had visions about Jerusalem was part of the confusion after October 22, 1844. And part of the reason for this confusion and the errors weren't as much the result of the visions, but it says, I saw that the faults and errors of this sister and those with her in past time had not been confessed. So they had not confessed some faults. And this is the reason why they have been left to run with great errors. So this was in a scattering time that this happened. And she cautions Brother Bates to be careful and willing to receive light that comes in other ways through vision, besides through vision. So that makes me think maybe he was listening to her, but I don't know that for sure. And then she cautions Brother Bates. I saw that he was too slow to receive light from his brethren. So that would be a suggestion to us. And then we're coming to Review and Herald. And I'm going to read this one paragraph here, and then I'm probably going to shut it off and come back. November 1, 1850, she writes to Dear brethren and sisters, I wish to give you a short sketch of what the Lord has recently shown me in vision. I was shown the loveliness of Jesus and the love that the angels have for one another. Said the angel, Can ye not behold their love? Follow it. Just so God's people must love one another. Rather let blame fall on thyself than on a brother. So it's interesting coming out of this confusion, coming into a gathering time where she is talking about loving each other, not really saying not to accuse each other, but instead let blame fall on yourself instead of a brother. And then after this, in the next few paragraphs, she talks about praying for the sick and communion, which I take that to be the solemn assembly prayer, and there are many elements that are found in the book of Joel.